going on in the Arab world than what Arab public opinion is. And you hear a lot about what the Arab dictators say, but you don't hear about what the public thinks, and that's very revealing. So what does the public think? The polls, incidentally, are taken by the leading U.S. polling agencies, most prestigious ones that are released by major institutions, Brookings Institute and so on. It's inconceivable that the media don't know about them, and the planet certainly do. And they're interesting. So, for example, in Egypt, the most important country in the Arab world, about 90% of the population regard the United States as their main enemy, main threat that they face. Opposition to U.S. policy is so strong that in Egypt, about 80% think the region would be more secure if Iran had nuclear weapons. Not just nuclear energy, but nuclear weapons. Maybe 10% regard Iran as a threat. And the figures are a little different country by country, but that's roughly the story about the Arab world. So you can see very clearly why the U.S. and its allies, Israel, of course, and the Western allies, they cannot tolerate democracy in the Arab world. Not authentic democracy, at least, the kind of democracy in which public opinion will have some impact on policy. And if it did, the United States not only wouldn't control the region, which has been a primary goal for 70 years, but it would be driven out. And that's no small thing. It's a major concern has been to maintain control of the energy reserves of the world concentrated there. So, of course, the U.S. and its allies are very frightened of democracy in the Arab world. Of course, they talk about democracy. Stalin talked about democracy too. They can't possibly accept it. We'll do anything to block it and feel it closely. The policies towards the various uprisings, you see it clearly. Come back to that if you like. It should bear in mind that there's nothing new about this. This goes way back. And there's plenty of evidence about it, plenty of documentation. It should be on the front pages of the newspapers. Certainly should be taught in schools. So let's go back, say, to the 1950s. In 1958, been then classified, since then declassified documents, internal documents. President Eisenhower, 58, raised with his staff a problem that bothered him. He said he was concerned about what he called the campaign of hatred against us in the Arab world. And not by the governments, which are more or less supportive, but by the people. And wanted a discussion of this. Well, right at that time, the National Security Council, which is the highest planning body, came out with a memorandum in which they analyzed that situation. They said, there's a perception in the Arab world that the United States supports dictatorships, harsh, brutal dictatorships, and blocks democracy and development, and that we do this because we want to maintain control of their energy resources. And it went on to say that the perception is more or less accurate, and furthermore, that's what we ought to be doing, because we want to control it, and democracy would get in the way. So that was 1958. Fast forward to 2001, plenty in between, I'll skip it. Right after 9/11, George W. Bush made a pathetic speech in which he asked, why do they hate us? His answer was, they hate our freedoms. Study by the Pentagon Research Group, Defense Science Board, which I don't think is recorded here, but they essentially reiterated what the National Security Council said in 1958. They said they don't hate our freedoms, but they hate our policies. And then they went through it, essentially the same policies, they haven't changed. What they should have said is, we hate their freedoms, and we hate their freedoms for a really good reason. If they're free, we're not going to be able to carry out these policies, and we want to. And we're beginning to see that. There's a doctrine that was articulated pretty well by former Jordanian high official Marwan Washer, who's the that this general principle, which is that as long as everything's quiet, as long as the population is under control, and then the powerful can ignore the population, do anything they like. That's called the Moasher doctrine. A very, very wide application. Actually, it applies within the United States as well, rather crucial. So the Moasher doctrine holds, and therefore we don't care about the campaigns of hatred. We don't care that they hate us. We hate their freedoms for good reasons. We'll ignore the polls. All of this became pretty dramatically clear here just in the last few months with WikiLeaks exposures. Of all the WikiLeaks exposures, the one that got the most publicity and big headlines, lobby for commentary, was that the Arabs support U.S. policy on Iran. And that's a core U.S. policy now, isolating, undermining Iran. And the Arabs support us. And that was the headline, a lot of clapping and so on. Well, they were talking about the Arab dictators. What about the population? Like I said, the population, it's about 10% think Iran is a threat, and a considerable majority think the region would be better off if they had nuclear weapons. But under the Moasher doctrine, it doesn't matter. As long as they're suppressed by the dictatorships that we back, or somehow silenced, then we can do what we like. If the Arab dictators support us, who cares about anyone else? Now that's strikingly not just the diplomatic record, that's the press, that's the intellectual community, the whole intellectual community. Just read the commentary on this and see. General assumption, maybe they'd like to have Iran have nuclear weapons, but as long as the dictators are with us, who cares? And as long as they're quiet. That's the prevailing attitude right through the whole educated, articulate community, not just on this issue, and as I said, it holds domestically as well, we're thinking about. Well, the Arab Spring has had a number of effects already. One of them I just mentioned, that Egypt did move forward to bring about the unification that the U.S. and Israel are quite concerned about. That's only one thing. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, Egypt, the new Egypt, allowed Iranian ships through the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean. Now, that is the first time that's ever happened, and the U.S. and Israel don't like it. The Mediterranean is our lake, not anyone else's. And they work with that. It looks as if they're going to move to open the Gaza border. The closing of the Gaza border, participating in the Israeli siege, is very unpopular in Egypt. And it looks as if Egypt is taking some steps now to open the border, which would break the siege. And that's critical. In the background is another question which is uncertain. There is a treaty, Egypt-Israel treaty in 1979, which is also extremely unpopular in Egypt among the population. If you read about it here, there's a lot of concern that they may weaken it or maybe even rescind it. The way it's described here is, literally, New York Times, that the treaty is very important because it helps preserve stability in the region. That's a very interesting commentary because what the treaty does is preserve instability in the region. And that's very clear and explicit. As soon as the treaty was signed in 1979, Israel recognized, it's obvious, but they, of course, also recognized that with the treaty with Egypt, the main Arab deterrent is out of the game. Egypt is by far the main military force, the organized military force in the region. So with the Arab deterrent gone, Israel's free to